Clearly, the autopsy report by Dr. Clay Nichols is the weakest link in the vindictive murder prosecution of Crystal Mangum in her boyfriend's death. Logically, it is not unreasonable to exploit this vulnerability by having the autopsy report on Mr. Day re-evaluated, precisely what Mangum advocate Dr. Haar has been attempting for some time. There was precedent for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services ordering the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner to conduct a review of questionable or controversial autopsy reports, as was laid out in a July 11, 2014 News and Observer article titled, quote, "Carrie strangulation suspect goes free after judge's doubts about medical report," unquote. At the time, Dottie Amte, a 61-year-old white female Cary resident, strangled her debilitated ethnic minority 77-year-old husband, Sherrod Amte, with her bare hands in a dispute over cable television viewing. Despite admitting to choking him and police initiating a criminal homicide investigation, Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Clay Nichols stated that the manner of death was natural causes, explaining that while Dottie was in the process of strangling her husband Sherrod, he died of a heart attack. Dr. Nichols argued that Miss Amte should not be charged with murder or manslaughter, but rather assault at the most.
Did he die during an assault? Yes. Did the assault cause his death? No, said Clay Nichols, then the state's Deputy Chief Medical Examiner, in a discussion described in Cary police records. The probable cause of death, according to the initial medical examiner's report, was acute coronary artery thrombosis, a clot blocking blood flow in the heart, leading to a heart attack. It listed contributing conditions of diabetes and chronic kidney disease, but not strangulation. A handwritten narrative, signed by a county examiner, Shannon Covey, noted that police were treating the case as a homicide. However, it continued, the preliminary autopsy findings made it a natural death. Nichols, the deputy chief, told the detectives that Dottie Amte would be guilty of an assault, not murder, records state.
This illogical determination and reasoning in the Amte case set the stage for the Department of Health and Human Services to order a review of the autopsy report by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Following review, the manner of death was changed from natural causes to homicide, which led to Dottie Amte accepting a plea deal offered by prosecutors.
The state had added several crucial lines to the official assessment of Sherrod Amte's death. The addendum, dated June 17th and signed by Scott, said that Amte's strangulation of her husband likely strained his heart, worsening the shortage of fresh blood to the muscle. In the amended document, the phrase complications of assault became the single major cause of death, while a coronary blood clot now was just a contributing cause. The report primarily cites timing, the assault and the death soon after, as evidence of the link. In other words, the examiner concluded this could still be classified as a homicide. It's standard for medical examiners to review and potentially amend their findings, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees medical examiners.
Such a review is what Dr. Haar had been seeking from the beginning. His August 23, 2012 letter to then Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Deborah Radich being ignored. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later, on June 25, 2014, after receiving an inquiry from a Republican senator's office at Haar's behest, that she responded. Dr. Radich's 3-sentence response ended with, quote, "The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner believes the findings in this report to be accurate and appropriate," unquote. Contrarily, the truth being, as Dr. Weck pointed out in his report as follows, quote, "The significant inconsistencies that I identified when comparing the medical record and the autopsy report made by Dr. Nichols," unquote. By her letter, Dr. Radich's medical examiner office is challenging Dr. Weck on the very credibility of Dr. Nichols' autopsy report. Keep in mind that Dr. Haar questioned Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Deborah Radich about the reliability of Dr. Nichols' autopsy report more than a year before Crystal Mangum's November 2013 trial. After Dr. Cyril Weck weighed in on the case with his October 25, 2019 report, Dr. Haar requested in a May 26, 2020 letter to Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Mandy Cohen that she order a review of Dr. Nichols' autopsy report of April 14, 2011. Procedurally, the same thing as in the Dottie Ampe murder case. Despite Haar's assertions that a review could overturn a wrongful conviction and free an innocent mother of three, Dr. Cohen ignored him as though he didn't exist and she didn't care. On September 9, 2020, Edgecombe County Representative Mr. Shelley Willingham, at the behest of Dr. Haar, wrote a 2-page letter to DHHS Secretary Dr. Cohen asking her to review the April 14, 2011 autopsy report by Dr. Clay Nichols. On September 14, 2020, Dr. Cohen replied with an email to Representative Willingham by refusing his request and stating that she felt it was inappropriate. Dr. Cohen claimed that the former Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Deborah Radich, had conducted a thorough review which determined that Reginald Day died as a result of complications from his injury. This despite the fact that his death followed his elective removal from life support. It goes without saying that Dr. Cohen refused to order a review of Dr. Clay Nichols' autopsy because doing so would expose serious flaws in the report that would undermine the prosecution case against Crystal Mangum, leading to her release from custody and exoneration. Furthermore, it would deal a blow to the Duke Lacrosse myth that portrays Crystal Mangum as a villain rather than victim. By not reviewing Dr. Nichols' autopsy report in good faith, Dr. Mandy Cohen fulfilled two objectives: the cruel punishment of Miss Mangum, a black mother of three, and protecting those whose criminality led to the wrongful no-crime conviction. In addition to his fraudulent official document, Dr. Clay Nichols committed material perjury, as did Durham Police Officer Mary Ann Bond. During the following month of October 2020, Dr. Haar asked others in position of influence and power to do nothing more than write a letter to Dr. Mandy Cohen and ask for a review of the Dr. Nichols autopsy report. Those asked included Senate Minority Leader Dan Blue, Congresswoman Deborah Ross, and Lieutenant Governor candidate Yvonne Lewis Hawley. They all ignored him. On October 22, 2020, Dr. Haar mailed a handwritten letter by Crystal Mangum to Dr. Cohen with a cover letter. Once again, Dr. Cohen lacked the decency to respond. At a vigil outside the governor's mansion on November 15, 2020, seeking from Governor Roy Cooper a pardon of innocence for Ronnie Long, a black man wrongly convicted of rape and incarcerated for more than 4 decades, Reverend Dr. T. Anthony Spearman, the president of the North Carolina NAACP, spoke. Along with Ronnie Long and his wife Ashley, the Duke law professor who won an appeal on a rehearing en banc for Mr. Long, Jamie Lau, was present and spoke. Dr. Haar gave both Reverend Spearman and Jamie Lau a packet of information about Mangum's innocence, which included Dr. Weck's report. Har had no expectation of any interest from Mr. Lau because of his affiliation with Duke University School of Law. But he was hopeful, after finally meeting the president of the state NAACP, Reverend Spearman would come through. Like all of the others, the only thing Har requested was a letter from them to Dr. Mandy Cohen seeking a review of the Nichols autopsy report. After 2 months, Reverend Spearman emailed Dr. Har to tell him he was too busy and that he was referring the issue to noted Durham civil rights attorney Al McShirley, who was quick to respond that he also was too busy. Furthermore, he advised Har that if he loved Crystal Mangum, he would keep still. This despite evidence of her absolute innocence in a no-crime wrongful conviction. On December 3, 2020, Dr. Har was attending a candlelight vigil outside the governor's mansion when he met Durham Representative Vernetta Alston, who had stopped by to give her support. He told her about Crystal Mangum's unjust plight, but Representative Alston refused to commit to writing a letter to Dr. Mandy Cohen. Miss Alston said that she would speak to Dr. Cohen about the issue, and she requested time before responding. Dr. Har sent her a packet that included Dr. Weck's report the following day. More than 2 months later, there's been no reply to Dr. Har. On December 24, 2020, after learning that Durham Representative Robert Reeves, an African-American attorney, had been selected as the minority leader of the House, Dr. Har sent him a packet with the Dr. Weck report and a request that he write a letter to Dr. Cohen about a review of the Dr. Nichols autopsy report. There would be no response from Representative Reeves. Whether through lack of will, lack of courage, or lack of both, no one other than Representative Shelley Willingham would even write a letter on behalf of Crystal Mangum to request of Dr. Mandy Cohen that Dr. Clay Nichols' autopsy report be re-evaluated.
Am Anfang bin ich noch zusammengezockt, obwohl ich einen Fahrschein hatte, bin die kamen zu und die Tür schloss mit dem Tut.
On November 27, 2013, 5 days following Crystal Mangum's second-degree murder conviction in the death of Reginald Day, Michael W. Chapman, the managing editor of the right-leaning online CNS News, published an article titled "Duke Rape Accuser Got 160 TV News Stories on Accusation, 3 on Murder Conviction." While accepting the statistics, the premise laid out by Mr. Chapman that the dearth of TV stories about Mangum's murder conviction was evidence of an attempt by leftist media to protect the Black Duke Lacrosse accuser from adverse publicity is utterly false. Truth is that the paucity of stories about Crystal Mangum's conviction was due to the fact that the mainstream TV media had been notified of the truths of Mangum's innocence in her boyfriend's death and preferred to limit involvement in its spreading news to the general public about the wrongful conviction. The media having been informed of the unjust legal proceeding by Dr. Har. After being abandoned by the North Carolina Prisoner Legal Services in January 2017 and representing herself pro se, Mangum was heavily vested in filing legal documents with the courts that were newsworthy, but nonetheless disregarded by the media. These pro se legal challenges included a habeas corpus petition, civil lawsuits in state and federal courts on claims of malicious prosecution and libel defamation, their related appeals, and 2 motions for appropriate relief. Universally, there was no media coverage on the complaints filed or the court's rulings. One glaring exception was a January 3, 2018 story in the Durham daily newspaper, the Herald Sun, titled, quote, Duke Lacrosse accuser wants cash, new murder trial, but will ally land in court, unquote. First, the lawsuit was a civil complaint for malicious prosecution on the larceny of chosen action charges alleging that Mangum stole 2 cashier's checks, a charge for which the jury found her not guilty. The heart of Mangum's lawsuit is explained in the last 2 paragraphs of the article and reads, quote, The Tuesday filing argues that Mangum should have never been charged with 2 counts of larceny of chosen action, a charge that relates to taking a banknote, promissory note, or other form of payment issued by a bank or related entity. Mangum had 2 of Day's money orders for rent. Haar says Day asked Mangum to hold the money orders. Mangum was convicted of second-degree murder, but not the larceny of chosen action crimes, unquote. However, under the pretext of covering the civil claim Mangum filed, the true purpose of the article was to prod the North Carolina State Bar to attack Haar for his legal assistance provided to Crystal Mangum, and in doing so bring to light the permanent injunction filed against him in February 2013. Although Dr. Cyril Weck's October 25, 2019 report presented Mangum as being absolutely innocent in Reginald Day's death, the media has continued to attribute his demise to Mangum's stab wound while concealing Duke University Hospital's responsibility with its fatal medical malpractice. An example would be as follows regarding news coverage by WRAL5 News online article of November 22, 2013, titled, quote, Mangum found guilty in boyfriend's stabbing death, unquote. In July 2020, months following Dr. Weck's report, Dr. Haar notified the media organization through its attorney of the exonerative report, its implications, and requested a correction be appended and the title be amended to remove the word stabbing from the headline. Following several weeks without a response, a second, more forceful letter was sent to WRAL5 News with a warning of impending legal action if the November 2013 online article was not altered to reflect the truth. It is apparent that Reginald Day's death was not due to a stab wound, as his emergency surgery for the single non-life-threatening wound was successful with a post-operative prognosis for a full recovery. What the media secreted from the public was that Day died after being electively removed from life support following a week's observation without neurologic improvement from a brain death-induced comatose state resulting from an errant esophageal intubation in treating his delirium tremens. There was absolutely no nexus between the stab wound inflicted by Mangum and Day's brain death or actual death. A true stabbing death was reported in WRAL5 News online article of March 18, 2015, titled, quote, Broyhill found guilty in Jamie Hahn stabbing death, unquote. She died 2 days following wounds Jonathan Broyhill inflicted to her back, chest, abdomen, and face, with an assortment of other lacerations. It amounts to blasphemy for WRAL5 News to compare Day's death as being a similar stabbing death as was Jamie Hahn's. Any objective, reasonable person would assess Hahn's death to be resultant from the 4 crucial stab wounds she sustained, whereas the single non-fatal stab wound to Reginald Day had nothing to do with his death. Further, medical examiner Dr. Clay Nichols could not even describe any so-called complication stemming from the wound to Mr. Day or its surgical treatment. Bottom line, Reginald Day's demise was not a, quote, stabbing death, unquote. Failure of WRAL5 News to take steps to address concerns presented by Dr. Haar's letters of July 2020 ended with Crystal Mangum's January 6, 2021 libel defamation civil lawsuit filed in Wake County Superior Court. More than 2 months after Mangum filed her lawsuit against WRAL5 News, a Washington, D.C. attorney, Hans Bader, who has practiced civil rights and constitutional law, wrote a March 28, 2021 article for the right-leaning site Liberty Unyielding, titled, quote, 15 years ago, Duke hate crime hoax was peddled by media and racial justice reformers, unquote. The article included a single-sentence paragraph which read, quote, the woman who falsely accused the lacrosse players of rape, Crystal Mangum, later stabbed her boyfriend to death and was convicted of murder for doing so, unquote. The link was directed to the WRAL5 News article of November 22, 2013. The article by Attorney Bader was picked up by other sites, including Minding the Class and CNS News, which perpetuated and spread the big lie that Crystal Mangum was responsible for the death of Reginald Day. Besides a few intrepid individuals, civil rights, social justice organizations, and the media are expected to serve as a final bulwark to protect the constitutional rights of the downtrodden and disenfranchised. In Ms. Mangum's case, both the civil rights social justice groups, such as the NAACP and ACLU, and the media types, by their collective silence on the truths of her innocence in Reginald Day's death, have failed. Through lack of will or courage, or both, the media has laid bare its preference to protect the image of Duke University Hospital at the expense of condemning an innocent black single mother of 3 to serve a minimum 14-year sentence of imprisonment for an avoidable death caused by the medical center itself. By diverting its spotlight on the big lie perpetuated by WRAL5 News and other media outlets, and leaving the truths of innocence hidden in the shadows, it is undeniably verified that justice, like democracy, dies in darkness.